Those like-minded. Yeah, a title in chapter 26 that we may not really know what it means and how it represents this chapter. And after reading it several times to understand it, it turns out that those like-minded is not that simple. But at least the definition of those like-minded is not just about opinions, ways of thinking, or even life goals. Perhaps a simple analogy would be an alliance. With several different shinobi or entities, those who share the same thoughts, goals, or even vision will indirectly lead to the probability of people being on the same frequency, even if their backgrounds are different. In this case, there are so many examples, both from the Boruto series and even Naruto, like the Akatsuki organization, Kara, and the like. Even though they actually have their own ambitions, the point is that they agree to achieve one goal and have the same mindset. And once again, regardless of the eventual betrayal and such, at least they were once a single organization with the same priority. And these are the two topics we will break down: those who are like-minded and Mamushi's perspective. And perhaps it can also be referred to as the vibes that are still in chapter 26. Although I'm a little confused about where to start, how about we begin with Hidari, Mamushi, and Jura? Yes, of those three divine tree humans, for some reason, even though Jura poses such a great threat because of his fighting abilities, especially since he is the reincarnation of Ten Tails, I actually see Mamushi as having more terrifying potential than some of the other divine tree humans. And I know, maybe if we did a poll, perhaps out of these 5 Shinju, you would choose Mamushi as the weakest or just average compared to some of the other divine tree humans, right? And the reason is clear because Mamushi is a bug, where he is not a special shinobi like Sasuke and others. However, even though the manifestation of chakra is something important and needs to be considered, when they become divine tree humans, their existence cannot be judged or determined based on who their manifestation actually is. In other words, even though every divine tree human is a manifestation of the shinobi themselves, it doesn't mean that those who are not from the shinobi class are weak or something like that. Chapter 26 has proven everything. In my opinion, understanding, way of thinking, and intelligence are the greatest strengths compared to physical strength. This means that intelligence is 2 steps ahead of physical strength. Because if you observe the previous chapters, Hidari and Jura, who are Shinju, have an interest in studying various books to understand what they want to know. And of course, that has something to do with information that leads to their curiosity about humans and some reasons within themselves that they don't yet know. Emotional feelings such as sadness, anger, love, and even the ultimate purpose of desire itself. That is the real point. However, Mamushi is very different. He is 2 steps ahead of some divine tree humans and understands himself and his desires better. What's particularly interesting is that Mamushi is the only Shinju who is not particularly interested in the concept of love. Is that right? He thrives through Ida's genetics. What Mamushi wants from Ida is not just to devour her. Like other prey, it is possession. Mamushi wanted Ida for his mind so he could integrate her genetic information. Because one thing is certain, love or anything like that is not important to Mamushi. Because at the very least, Shinju as a species must thrive. And you need to underline that Mamushi's definition is not that simple. Because basically, Shinju is like a tree. A tree that merely lives, just standing tall, its leaves withered and its roots fragile, that is merely living. A tree that is pruned but still survives, that is surviving. A tree that grows tall with many branches but breaks easily, that is growing. But thrive, that's different. Shinju that thrive are trees that don't just stand and aren't just there, they dominate. They absorb power from their surroundings, transforming all energy into their own, until eventually no other creature can hinder their growth. That is the concept of thrive for the divine tree humans. Not just staying alive after falling, not just developing, but growing with full power and ultimately dominating the entire ecosystem in which they stand. Because for Shinju, just living is not enough. They evolve for more than that. But honestly, the mystery or the big question mark is what kind of evolution will occur in them. But after thinking about it, it seems that the divine tree humans may not be just a temporary form, but the true evolution of Shinju. Because as you know, in the past, the divine tree could only live by sucking the planet's energy, right? But now they have bodies, consciousness, and even ambition. And perhaps this is what thrive should mean to them. Not just living or surviving, but evolving by mastering the best genes of other creatures. Not only humans, Otsutsuki, even Ida with his godlike Shinjutsu. all can be used as material to strengthen this species, especially Jura with Naruto. Every time they absorb or devour something new, it is impossible for them to become ordinary, and they will certainly become more perfect. From mere parasites, they can transform into a far superior species. In other words, if that goal is achieved, the divine tree humans won't just survive, they will triumph, and perhaps even replace the Otsutsuki themselves. Is that right? But what do you guys think? If you have a different perspective on Mamushi's definition, please let me know, guys. So yeah, in essence, Mamushi doesn't see Ada as just prey. He wants to control her, to make her his mine. If develop only means strength and intelligence, then thrive means Mamushi is thinking about how their existence won't just end with the current generation. And maybe beyond that, this is the part I find the most interesting. The Shinju were first introduced with a sense of curiosity about knowledge and the many things humans possess. But for their kind, those things don't matter. They don't care, and they believe that the way of thinking as divine trees is superior. But then, after trying to understand things from another perspective and absorbing different kinds of knowledge, they began to take interest in human emotions, especially love. And we know the end of love is reproduction. That's absolute. Someone who loves will eventually form a family, which then produces a new generation, right? However, this is what becomes part of our questions and curiosity. Are Ikemoto and Kishimoto directing Shinju towards another love story? But this love is more about procreation. Above all, you can't ignore this moment, guys. Honestly. Is it just a coincidence that Mamushi saw some sexy girls in that magazine? Doesn't he have other desires? I know this sounds like an adult conversation, but that's how it is. Seeing Mamushi reading an adult magazine, it makes perfect sense that what is meant by development in this story is procreation. On the other hand, I know this might be a coincidence or something, but we need to consider this. In last week's updated Jippo Kashin Koji, we also saw Mamushi bringing an entity very similar to the new Shinju when he came to Konoha Village. Is that right? So what is it really? If you have a more interesting opinion, please let me know. And finally, those like-minded. I know that many fans think that this has something to do with Boruto and Momoshiki, but at this point, the title actually represents Inojin and Kashin Koji. Boruto and Momoshiki actually fall into this category, but for some reason, Inojin and Kashin Koji are more relatable. Honestly, by creating a scenario that seems forced because Koji is taking advantage of Inojin's feelings for Himawari, somehow this is the perfect way of thinking. I mean, Ino is no longer on Shikamaru's side and helping him do illegal things like contacting Boruto. And that means the title of this chapter is more about Inojin than Boruto or even Momoshiki. And actually, besides that, I have a reason why Momoshiki hasn't taken over half, or at least Boruto's consciousness. In other words, what you see here isn't Momoshiki, but let me explain all this in the next video. So yeah, as the final conclusion, Mamushi is actually more terrifying compared to some of the other Divine Tree humans. And what you're seeing here is not something silly or anything like that. Because actually, there are so many interesting things, especially about Mamushi's desires. But what do you think? Would it be a strange scenario if Mamushi had a desire to reproduce like humans? Or if not like humans, is there another way? Would it be by simply devouring based on its desires? Or is there something else? But if I had to choose one scenario, for some reason I'm more convinced that in the end they will reproduce like humans. But it should be noted that this is when the Shinju has truly evolved to a point of perfection that is perhaps on par with humans or even Otsutsuki. Because I'm sure we all know the history of the Otsutsuki from the beginning until they reproduced, right? But again, this is just a theory and speculation, and to avoid sounding like nonsense, perhaps some reasons can be considered. Yeah, that's just how it is. So yeah, thank you for watching, like and subscribe. I'm Nim without the E. See you in the next video.